Hello, everyone. You are all very welcome to our first Link and Learn webinar of 2023. And what a great topic to kick off with today, particularly with all the conversation in the media and elsewhere about ChatGPT and AI in general. My name is Dave Farley, Head of Membership Services at Learnovate, and I have the pleasure of being your host for this event. Today, we have a keynote by my colleague, Ilse White, Senior Corporate Learning Researcher at Learnovate. Ilse will bring us through the latest in L&D systems innovation. We will then take our usual short break for some networking. Simply click the networking button on the left-hand side and join. You will be paired with another attendee, and to facilitate the conversation, you may want to take a crack at answering the following question. Why did you register for today's webinar? We will be then joined on screen by our four panelists who were selected for the range of contributions that they can make to today's conversation, from corporate L&D to schools and everywhere in between. Our chair, Lindsey Coode, is in the perfect position to moderate the panel as the head of product innovation at Learning Pool. Lindsey will be joined by Ciara McNamara from Folan's Education, Gavin Woods from Orion Learning, and John Burks from Aristo Solutions. Before we get started, there are a couple of housekeeping items to cover. Please use the chat on the right to ask questions of Ilse and our panelists. Ilse will be available on chat after her presentation. We will also be running a poll. If you would like to participate, just click on the poll button beside chat. In order to make our webinars as inclusive as possible, there's the option to add subtitles. Please click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. The slides from Ilse's presentation, as well as other support materials on this subject, will be shared with attendees only after today's event, so please keep an eye out for your email this afternoon. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Ilse to the stage for her keynote. Welcome, Ilse.
Thank you, Dave, and welcome everybody once again to our Link and Learn on innovation in learning and development. My name is Ilse White, and I'm a learning experience researcher with the Learnovate Centre. I have a background in instructional design and program management in corporate learning, but some of my recent research work in Learnovate has focused more on the world of education. So I'm going to try and include both perspectives in my presentation today while I talk you through the latest and actually origins, I should say, on learning technology. So today I will be sharing some insights on the following in relation to learning technology and innovation in education and industry. I'll start off with a little exploration into the relationship between humanity and learning technology, which is then followed by a conversation really about how useful and impactful learning technology is or has been. And then after that, I'll discuss some of the best practice on decision making around learning technology, and particularly with an eye on what we know from the learning sciences. And that's then followed by a short conversation on how innovation in learning technology happens or doesn't happen. And I would like to finish today's presentation with a final note and reflection about some of the newest technology, AI most notably, that's out there and how it relates to what we discussed today. But first, let's take a look at the fundamental relationship between humanity and learning technology. So us humans are Homo sapiens, which we know, which is Latin for knowing man or knowing human. So to put it more correctly, we are the people that learn to know. So for 3 million years, really, we've been creating technology that has shaped our cognition and has enabled our social and cultural progress. And we've been creating learning technology as well, really, since our very existence. So what underlies our progress as a species and the invention of all other technologies really is learning technology. If you consider from the earliest days of the stone tools and cave paintings through to the alphabet and manuscripts and books and printing to computers, the smartphones, the internet, AI, newer technology, and the metaverse. And, they'll start talking faster because the innovations are coming faster. All of these have melded to create minds, institutions, and really the cumulative legacy that is our civilization. I've put a reference. Donald Clark speaks about this in a lot of detail and very well in his book, which I've referenced on this slide. If you want, you can go into full screen modes to capture this, but I'll be referencing any of the sources that I've used throughout this presentation in case you wanted to have a read of them. The key point, though, that I try to make here is that when you think about it, learning technology is fundamental to the progress of our species, and it's the technology that precedes and enables the creation of all the other technologies. Because if we don't learn, we don't have any cultural transmission or progress as a species or as a society. But bringing it back a little bit to today's world, it's fair to say that learning technology has served or can serve humans really well, which makes me very excited. It can support the learner in their personal learning process. It can also support the educator in facilitating that learning process, and as well, it can support the leader in developing the policies and the strategies and decisions that support the learning or the learning process. So the important thing to remember here is that the learning technology should always support the effectiveness of the learning, which is not always the case. And that leads me to a very important question I wanted to ask today. It's really about how useful and impactful is or has learning technology been in our world. Um, over the past 2 decades, researchers have developed a much better understanding of how people learn. There's been significant progress in the field of learning science, and consequently, they're better able to define why and how learning technology adds value to the learning process. And some of those key affordances are displayed here, and they're taken from How People Learn Too, which is a book which I highly recommend if you're interested in the science of learning. And as you can see, there's a lot of positives here of how learning technology really practically contributes to learning. When we look at the kind of the positives of learning technology through the lens of learning technology, there are 10 common rules that are identified that make learning technology impactful. And the first 5 that you see here really are there. They define our cultural progress, so our progress as a species. And the second a list of 5 there define the cognitive potency, or maybe like the quality of our learning, or the increase the effectiveness of our learning. So the full details on these best practices, again, can be found in the book that I've referenced on this page. But our panelists today will also share some real life examples with you of how learning technology has or has not contributed to impactful learning from their perspectives. But for today, I want to continue now with a look at the innovation and developments within the learning technology industry. So this very colorful and busy and somewhat overwhelming image represents the global learning technology landscape in 2021 in an educational context. There's a similar one for corporate learning or learning and development, but that was probably not fit to page, or definitely both of them won't. But there's two key points to remember here. The first one is that we have created significant industry around learning technology in the expectation and hope that the world of learning and education would be changed by technology as much as the increasing presence of technology has changed our lives in general. So there is an enormous economic opportunity in education and learning technology, which has been recognized by many, as you can see from here. The second point that I want to make about this image is that when you look at the colored categories, boxes at the top of this image, they and if you were to put a timeline against that, like, they really represent the variety of applications of technologies in learning, as well as the pace in which one development and one idea follows the other. So, and all of that is still moving around. It's not that, technology that was invented 10 years ago has gone away. So all of the pieces here are kind of moving around. But thankfully, it's not here, because I think this image provides enough sensory overload as it is. Another way of looking at this is maybe through like shifts in learning technology compared to the shifts in technology itself. And this table I've adapted from an infographic on the history of EdTech. And really, when you look at technology over the past 4 decades and how that development has changed the priority and has driven progress and innovation in the world of learning, it's very interesting to kind of see those bigger shifts happening, and how technology shifts translate into priorities in education, and consequently the need for learning technology in those areas. I won't go through this table in detail today, but this and the previous image do make me wonder, like, does all this technology really have an impact on effective learning? And I'm going to make a pretty bold statement to say that I think the jury is very much out on that answer, the answer to that question. And I want to kind of illustrate this through a few quotes in in the area of education. Um, so the first quote that you see there is by Thomas Edison, who in 1913 said that books will be obsolete in public schools and our school systems will be completely changed inside of 10 years. Well, that didn't quite happen. Like, books are still very much around along with other technology, and we're still sitting in classrooms. So it hasn't changed significantly in the way that maybe Edison was predicting it. And in fact, there is an OECD study from 2015 that concluded that even though many developed countries have made big investments in technology, the data shows that these have actually led to no appreciable improvements in education achievement in young people, which is pretty shocking statement actually for 2015. And then the third quote there, Daisy Christodoulou shed some light on why that might be, and she outlines that in her book, Teachers versus Tech. And she says that transformative education vision still needs to be founded in these two realities, right? So first, the reality of understanding how human beings think and how they learn. And second, you need to consider that this change is taking place in a reality of what schools, teachers, parents, and wider society want from education. So you can't see it outside of that kind of bigger ecosystem that all these education systems kind of operate in, and where that change needs to happen. But then I want to finish on a positive note, because like, technology for education still holds so much promise, and it feels like we're somewhere on the cusp of an actual sort of more revolutionary change. And I wanted to highlight this quote by George Couros, who says that technology will never replace the great teachers, but in the hand of teachers, it is transformational. So all in all, bit of work to do, but there's still that promise out there, and a lot of has been achieved as well, but still a lot to do there. So next, I want to look a little bit at what likely will make a difference to ensure that learning technology is effective and in service of that learning or learner. And in education, that might well be the knowledge of the teacher. And the image on the left is the TPAC model, which is a technology integration framework that was developed by Mishra and Kohler in 2006. And it identifies the three types of knowledge that teachers and instructors, educators need to combine to ensure successful edtech integration in their teaching. Their content knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, and technological knowledge. And if all of these three are well developed, the quality of the teaching is likely to be very high. But the reality is that many teachers do not possess enough knowledge in all of these three areas, nor is that knowledge static. It's not like you learn it once and you be rid of it. So the need for teacher training and ongoing professional development is really high across many education systems. The image on the right is an example of, I suppose, a representation of an ecosystem, which applies a little bit more to, I think, the corporate world or public services. So it's a representation of an ecosystem in which any kind of technology needs to be developed and implemented and integrated and applied. And it comes back to that earlier point. You know, as you can see, learning technology is only one element in that ecosystem. So taking a strategic approach to integrating learning technology in your organization is the absolute key for success. Like the need for the three categories of knowledge, that ecosystem is also never static and requires constant attention and focus and ongoing innovation and effort. So yeah, so that's and once that happens, that's in these two different contexts, that's just what might make the difference. But the key point from this is maybe that with so much complexity, like, how do learning professionals make the right decisions about what learning technology to use for their organization? So I'm going to share a couple of lists that are a bit academic, but I think that they're helpful and bring us back to the basics. The most important thing here is that the decision to use a technology should always be based on evidence that the technology has a positive impact. And in order to make that choice, you need to consider kind of what the learning goals for the learning are. who your learners are and in what environments they cultural or social they operate or exist, then that's likely to affect their learning. And also the level of support that's needed in using the technology that's to be provided to both the learners and the educators, because sometimes that gets forgotten about and just assumed that you can do that, but that's not always the case, and you need to really be thoughtful about that. So the effective use of technologies in formal education and in training does require really careful planning for implementation that addresses the factors that are known to affect learning. This is like the full circle of kind of all the work that has to go on in the background in order to for the learning technology to have the intended effect on the learning. So most importantly, the technology needs to align with learning goals. There's no point in chasing gamification if you don't know what the intended outcomes of that are going to be. You also need to provide the right support for the instructors and the learners in order to access the technology, but also to know how to operate it. And you need to make sure it's accessible for everyone. Like using a web-based application for a child who doesn't have access to broadband is going to be a huge challenge. And then a very important part is that you need to collect data ongoingly on the student learning, but also evaluate the implementation of the technology to get that really important feedback on is it effective and what is it that we might need to change about this technology implementation. And that all involves a lot of hard and ongoing work. So how does innovation in learning technology then happen? You know, like it does happen, and innovations can come thick and fast, and they probably come even faster than the future. So, um, these are just a few insight or pieces of advice, I suppose, that we've gathered from our research and working experience with companies. They're not silver bullet solutions, but I think they serve as a good reminder to kind of bring it back to what's really important. The first one there is to say that innovation is not something that will happen overnight. It's an ongoing process that's an area of continued focus. And it doesn't always mean that you need to kind of use new technology. Like innovation doesn't always equal new. Like you can really use older technologies and apply new and novel approaches to them, and it can work just as well as long as the learning is considered. I think it's really important for organizations to kind of prevent the magpie trap and the follow all trends approach, because before you know it, you'll be chasing things like microlearning or gamification without really thinking about how it contributes or how it fits in with your learning and development strategy and how it contributes to the learning and if it's relevant for the business or the institution, institutional context that you operate in. If you do decide to innovate and look at new technologies, the advice there is to start small and to measure, to iterate, and really create a safe space for that to happen fast and to fail and to just kind of work it out before. And then if it works, you can start thinking about scaling it. And that is also why it's really important to involve the right stakeholders all along that journey, so you don't land things on them that are involved in the development, that they know it works or doesn't work, so that they that when you get to scaling it, it'll be a lot easier. So before that, like I felt that today I couldn't really talk about innovation in learning technology and not say something about artificial intelligence. There's no denying that it's a hot topic at the moment, so I just want to end my presentation with that today. Specifically, like I think artificial intelligence comes with a big promise of being able to support really big advances across many industries and use cases, including learning and development. I think the lure of an AI-driven assessment tool or a student support chatbot is real and it might actually already be happening in reality. But what's important is to remember that we always need to balance the technological promise with the actual impact on learning effectiveness in the context that you're operating in. And I think it's fair that we're being cautious and maybe quite resistant to new technologies like ChatGPT, because there are some really big opportunities, but there's also some really, really big concerns. But like it's our belief that at the end of the day, technology will always be changing, and it's important to stay open to it and to see how you can either use the new technology to your advantage, like try it out, or if you need to protect yourself from it in order to ensure the best possible learning outcomes. And I just want to finish up with a video recommendation on artificial intelligence from last week tonight. I've been told that the link in here doesn't necessarily work outside of Ireland, but I'm sure you can find a streaming or video platform that in your specific country if it doesn't. But this video does a really good job in explaining some of the best opportunities and risks of artificial intelligence in quite an entertaining way. I will say watch it at your own peril. It's frightening in places, but also very interesting. But for now, I just want to thank you for listening. I hope this was helpful and kind of reignited some passion for learning technology. And I will hand the floor back to Dave.
I'd now like to invite Lindsey Coode from Learning Pool to the stage. Welcome, Lindsey. Thank you for joining us today. I'd also like to welcome Ciara, Gavin, and John.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Ilse, for your presentation. So we'll start with introductions so you know who your panel are for today. So I'll kick us off. I'm Head of Innovation at Learning Pool, as I think David mentioned earlier, which means I'm in the really fortunate position of basically getting to think about innovation, learning and technology every day. I've worked in learning technologies for over 25 years, starting out as a learning designer. So really passionate about that kind of learner experience side. But currently I head up Learning Pool Labs, which is our evidence-based research and ideas hub. So what we aim to do is to create innovative solutions to real world problems. So basically starting with the challenges that people have, the needs people have, and looking at how we can meet those needs. So let's hand over to our panel. Ciara, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Ciara McNamara. I currently work with Folan's Education. So Folan's are an educational publisher, and I am working with them as their head of digital learning platforms. So I'm in charge of basically managing the design and the development of all of the learning platforms and the content that we deliver through those learning platforms. So again, this is something that's quite close to my heart and my everyday role. So I should say that this is mainly within the K-12 space. So we just work with primary and post-primary within Ireland. And I probably have about 16 years of education experience in the edtech space as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Ciara. We'll head over to John next.
Hello all. I'm John Burks. A few years ago, I formed my own little company, Aristo, and we sort of try and take a holistic approach across platforms, data, content, but most importantly, human behavior. And then for the past year or so, I've really been embedded with IHG, the Intercontinental Hotel Group, working on the implementation of the IHG Skills Academy. And that is a free to access, open to anybody anywhere around the world, loads of learning content with the aim of getting people into the workforce or back into the workforce if they've not had good access to education. That's gone live now in 9 languages, picked up in about 120 countries. Big project, very exciting, and it's kind of helped give me a seat here today. Love to.
Brilliant, thanks, John. And last but not least, Gavin.
Hi everyone, Gavin Woods, Managing Director of Orion Learning. We're very much about learning that works, so that's helping organisations here on the island of Ireland and globally to find out what their learning that works looks like. So big part of my time is spent problem solving, trying to deliberately innovate with all the organisations that we help.
Perfect, thank you. So I think we're going to start by talking about kind of pretty much where Ilse left off. So ChatGPT, obviously lots has changed in the world of AI in the last probably few months. I think was it just before Christmas that ChatGPT was launched, and it's really changed kind of how people in general in the real world, should we call it, as opposed to those of us that are quite techie or quite enjoy kind of looking at new technology anyway, view AI. And I think that's because it's given people the opportunity to get hands-on with it. All of these large language models have been around probably for at least a year or two, but you've not really been able to use them unless you're a developer. So I think that's kind of why it suddenly becomes such a big thing. I've certainly played with it quite a lot. I kind of feel like it's slightly like my new best friend. If I need to write something or I'm feeling slightly uninspired, I can ask it to help me with prompts and things like that. And I'm also looking at it in terms of some of the work that we're doing in Learning Pool Labs. But I'd be really interested to hear from each of you kind of your thoughts on it. And Gavin, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I think the word is sort of mainstreaming, and I think ChatGPT, because it looks so exciting on the surface, everybody's been using it and trying it and asking it things, and you start to see maybe the pros, maybe the limitations of it at the moment. I think one of the big things is that innovation like this is always going on, but it's really about finding the use cases for it. And I've certainly asked ChatGPT a few things, and it came back with things that weren't correct. It told us that we had won an award just last week, which we hadn't even entered. And then I said, well, that's not true. I know that not to be true. It said, thank you for the information, I'll update. So I think part of the reason why things like this are made available, particularly in AI, and made available for free, or that the questions that are being asked are actually improving that tool. That's how the automated side of it works. So it's not just the fact that those behind it want to get it out there. They actually want to make it better. But it's great that it has cut through into this kind of mainstreaming. We're talking about it today.
Yeah, I think that's really true. It's I think everyone knows it's not quite right. I mean, from my perspective, I think it's very clever and it can do a lot, but as you say, it's also very good at making things up. So you do need to be slightly wary about kind of trusting it. And I'm not sure that it's at a position yet where really you would trust it completely to kind of let it just run off and do what it wants to. John, it'd be interesting to hear from you if there's any kind of particular learning applications that you'd be keen to try out or have seen.
Yeah, there's a few different bits. I'll just go back to that point there about trust. I would think that's imperative. Everybody always remembers that in any of these new AI tools. There's always for the next few years, there's going to be an element of checking and sense checking the AI yourself, because you're a human at the end of the day. But yeah, broadly in the AI space, I keep saying to people, AI is democratizing technology for all of us. And by that, I mean the AI solutions that are coming out now are reducing that unit cost of some amazing technologies, voice dictation, video, all these other things. And suddenly we can all grab hold of these technologies for a much, much lower cost, produce it much, much quicker, and get it out into the learning space. So, there's a vast range of that. I won't bore people with the lists, but that's the way I think I get most excited when I see something that's $49 for a month subscription, and before maybe I paid thousands of pounds for it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, John and I have been, he said at the beginning that he's been working on lots of translation stuff. And we've been working together on some different kind of pilot projects using machine translation, because translation is a huge cost. And if you want to scale in the way that IHG are looking to do with their academy, then you need to find more efficient and economical ways of doing this. But the biggest lesson, and I think we knew this before we started, that has come out of it is that you can't trust it. So it's really useful if you've got people in country that can check that translation for you. It saves a lot of time, but you're not going to take something, trust the machine to translate it, and then give it to people and hope they learn the right things, because the likelihood is it will have some slightly odd bits in there.
Particularly when your simplified Chinese probably isn't up to scratch yourself.
I nearly got very burnt with simplified Chinese machine translation. Yes.
Yeah, we won't go into too much detail on that right now, but yes, it can be very interesting. Ciara, where do you see this going in education? I know I've certainly seen lots of articles that range from teachers using it and wanting to kind of get the kids to embrace it, to being terrified of it and thinking it changes the whole education landscape.
Yeah, I think I mean, one of the big fears with it is that, students will just throw the question into ChatGPT and get the answer, and so they don't have to actually do any of the work themselves. But so there will be, fears of cheating or whatever are kind of strong in it. But I do think we have got to remember that it's a tool, and that it is fallible. So it's and I actually thought I just spotted one of the comments that came up there from Lee. about it's about how you ask it the questions that actually is nearly like you really have to re-engineer your own prompts in order to get the best out of it. And so you actually, I think that's kind of the more interesting aspect of using it in education. Great. Like, this is the world we live in now, right? You can't just Google something. You can't just ask GPT and get some basic information, but now you have to interrogate it. And so I think that actual process is something that could really be used in learning, you know, because that's the real life example that students are actually going to be faced with. They don't really need to regurgitate all this information anymore, but they do need to be able to challenge it and to you know, to kind of to research and figure out, well, what are the right questions to be asking here in order to eradicate that bias or to really challenge it. So I think, I mean, I'm less on the skeptical side and more in like, great, this is a new tool. Okay, fine, it's not perfect, it doesn't work brilliantly, but yeah, let's see what we can use it for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it opens up lots of doors, doesn't it? I've just seen one of the comments around, this is going back to what we were saying about trust. And I think it's Paul saying, how do we know when we trust a human? How do we know when to trust a machine? And I think that's really interesting. One of the projects that I'm working on in labs at the moment is looking at whether we can use some of, not ChatGPT itself, but some of the models behind it to basically kind of see whether we can get it to do a coaching situation. So the example we're using is difficult conversations. So you set it a scenario and then you can literally have a conversation with it. And it's really interesting, but obviously it opens up lots of questions about kind of, well, what if it says something wrong? What if it's not quite right? But then actually that could happen with a human as well, particularly once you get into kind of like, well, how should I do this? What's this process? Humans often make mistakes. We make things up. We give the answer that, I mean, I always say I've worked at Learning Pool for 13 years. If you ask me a process thing, I will tell you what I think it is, but it might have been that 5 years ago. It could have changed since then. And it's kind of, yeah, it's an interesting one. So I think, as you say, Ciara, we always need to kind of verify ourselves, don't we? We need to ultimately make the decision whether we take that advice or that response. So, and I think that leads us on to kind of quite interestingly in terms of innovation generally. So let's move on from the AI specifically, because I know that people want to cover different areas as well. And I think how we innovate and kind of as organizations, whether that's in education, whether it's kind of obviously vendors side as we are in learning technologies, or within organizations themselves. But Gavin, I know that you're quite interested in this and work a lot in the innovation space. How do you think we can be kind of deliberate around innovation and ensure that we're kind of always looking to do things slightly differently?
Yeah. Well, Ilse touched on, you know, there's definitely a need for research, you know, and measurement of learning impact. But I'm a big fan of deliberate doing. Edison, he didn't invent the light bulb, you know, first time around. You know, it took lots and lots of attempts. So actually that need to feel is almost the catalyst of, you know, of innovation. And you know, some of the best innovations, be it in medicine or science, have been discovered accidentally, not deliberately. So I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned. So certainly in terms of the long-term sort of multi-project relationships that we're involved in, we really try to encourage that innovation lab approach, which is about being deliberate and is about defining a potential benefit of something and exploring it. So quite often that starts with actually CPD for the organizations we work with, where we'll run a session about ChatGPT, what it is, how it potentially could be used, what we feel would be an indicator of a good use case, and then we'll actually call for expressions of interest from across the organization, and then we'll look to define that into a project. So the idea of an organizational pilot is a term we use quite a lot, that some of these things aren't absolutely new, but they might be very new for your particular organization. So I think defining a way to do that on a regular basis, even once or twice a year, to try something new and to define how you could do that, and then look at measuring the lessons that you learn, look at measuring the impact, but being deliberate. So it's about deliberate doing to try to move from being just an observer of innovation to a doer of innovation.
Yeah, I think that's really good points. And I think it's also I agree with all of that, and I think it's also sometimes looking for the problems to solve, isn't it? I think innovation comes out of a need, sometimes rather than the technology. It's like Edison didn't go, I want to create a light bulb. He wanted to find a safe way of putting electrical light into people's homes so that they weren't burning them down with candles and all that kind of thing. And I think I've read quite a lot about Edison. Actually, it's quite interesting that there was lots of people in different countries going down very similar kind of funnels. And I mean, we see that now, but you'd expect that now because we're much more global. But it's actually always happened. Things progress and innovation builds on other people's ideas, on other people's technology, on other people's kind of projects and learning and all that kind of thing. It's almost that kind of, there's never a new idea, really. It's just an amalgamation of lots of.
It's that discussion. I think some of the best innovators, even within your own organizations, are the people who can take somebody else's idea, as you said, and run with it, and that gets them thinking. So even in my own personal work, I'm a bit like that. I'm probably majority of the time not the person to come up with the idea, but I get excited by the ideas of others, and they get excited by mine. And next thing you know, we've come up with something completely different together. So collaboration, part of LearnOvate, is really centered around that collaboration between organizations and the ed tech sector.
Yeah, and I mean, Ciara and John, does some of this resonate with you? Do you work in some of these ways, or?
Yeah, for sure. I particularly the piece that you're saying there about the focusing on the problem and really getting comfortable exploring that space is something that actually, as a company, we've been trying to call ourselves out on recently and do that, because it's so easy to jump to the solution. And Gavin, I like the idea of just getting out there and doing it. But the other thing that I found with this is actually creating the space to think, to actually slow down and think about things in a different way. So it actually really allows you to kind of get to those underlying, what is the problem here that we're trying to solve, as opposed to, well, there's 20 different solutions that we could come up with here and they're all quite exciting, but if when you actually really examine it, well, maybe some of those won't really address that problem that you're trying to solve. So kind of holding yourself to account on that and keeping yourself honest, I think is important too.
Absolutely, very good. I love the Edison analogy, particularly around the innovation. He wanted to get safe electricity into people's homes. But when you break it down, what was he doing? He was trying to make a little element glow when you pass electricity through it. And probably what he did was what we all do, looked back at your business, your organization, and said, right, well, what tools do I have here in my workshop? What do I already have that I can innovate with? And that is always such an important starting point. And that, for me, it goes back to when I was first designing courses and even classroom courses. What's your objective? What is the objective of innovating? What is the objective of implementing new technology? Is it to produce a bit of light out of an element? Is it to make a bit of learning stick better? Hook onto that objective. And I get obsessed with this bit of obsessive focus on the objective, and that seems to lead to innovation a lot of the time, broadly in human history.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. It's about almost taking people along with you as well, isn't it? You're saying about what tools have you got in your workshop, but for me, a lot of it is kind of who in my business is interested in this, who wants to help me take this forward, and it's that kind of winning hearts and minds can give a lot of kind of power behind your ideas, basically. Although sometimes it's easy to get taken away with them as well and get a little too wedded to them. I think what you were saying earlier, Gavin, about being willing to fail and being willing to go, actually, I might love this, but does it really add value? And just go.
I'm definitely slow to give up on my big ideas. I get wedded to them very closely, and I need a counterbalance, with realism and practicality at times. But you're absolutely right.
I think we're probably all guilty of that, aren't we? So, so what are the barriers to innovation? What can make innovation hard? I know, John, that you had some thoughts on this. Did you want to elaborate?
What can make innovation hard?
Well, it's particularly in learning technologies.
Well, within the, well, no, actually, I was going to say within the business setting, but that's not true. It's all settings now. Understanding your technological landscape and the landscape of, like you said, the people within the business as well. So every time I've been asked to look at implementing a system, an LMS, an LXP, bolt on things, we've always got to look these days at what the client, what the business wants it to talk to. So do we want our LXP to talk to a reporting system, an AI? Do you know what the data is? Always, the biggest challenge is understanding the data and understanding how your platforms can help you control that data when moving it across to different parts of your business. And again, a lot of innovation has come from that space. Sharing of data within a business in a safe way, and then doing something with it. I'm looking at Ciara there. The number of places now I see with my own kids and the way that their learning is represented and passed back to me, it's brilliant. It's so much better than it used to be, but it's one of the biggest challenges, doing something and making systems talk to each other.
Making systems talk to each other and managing those systems, the people who are actually managing those systems and making that all work, because I think this is definitely something we see in schools all the time, is that actually that context, that ecosystem. So you're talking about it in terms of all the APIs integrating and systems talking to each other, but even in a school situation where you have, a teacher in a classroom with, 20 kids minimum with their devices in front of them, how they're actually, and those devices need to be connected. It'd be great, teacher can throw up a question on the board, quick poll the students, see where everyone's at. That's the ideal. But actually getting the setup to that point is so difficult. We were in a school there just before Christmas where we wanted to check a particular feature. And before we could even get there, we realized, okay, so our product was fine. That feature worked okay. And the students got it. But in advance of that, they didn't have the most recent version of the browser updated. So they had to do that, or they had to reinstall the app. When they did that, they forgot their logins. So they had to re-log in. They had to sync up information. So that context of a use that a teacher in our instance is actually trying to deal with is, I think, can be a barrier to innovation. And, they get that fear then a little bit of technology. So that the pace at which technology gets adopted in the school then can be limited as well, as a result.
Yeah, that's a real shame, isn't it? Because you can almost feel kind of that teacher's kind of nervousness around getting everything working, because they're a pretty harsh audience, 30 kids. It's kind of, if you don't keep them going, if you don't keep them motivated and engaged, then you can lose control quite quickly. So trying to fiddle around, it's bad enough if you're in a webinar with adults and things don't work, but imagine that in front of kids. It must be really challenging.
I wanted to pick up on an earlier point actually that John made around the constraints and how that is actually really valuable though for innovation. So we often think of innovation as being the limitless, what you can do as far as your imagination can take you. And when we go along to these like BET, for example, as an educational fair, it's primed full of virtual reality and augmented reality sets, and it's what they're doing is so cool, but the reality is kids don't actually have that in the classroom. So it would be amazing to enable students to have access to that, but they don't. And so you have to look at the tools that they do have and what you can do with that. And I think that's actually a really good way of looking at how you can innovate with what you already have, what's lying around in your workshop, John.
I've actually just seen a comment from a question probably from Paul. So what if there is so much technology that innovation is actually turning the devices off and having a dialogue circle? And I think that's a really interesting one, and actually brings us on to our next point that we were going to talk about, which is about innovation in learning rather than just the tools and technology, because I think how we expect people to learn, how we engage with learners and all that kind of thing have changed vastly. although we talk about education having not changed hugely in the last however long people are still sat in classrooms, actually the way that teachers interact and engage with those pupils in the main has changed quite a bit. It's much less them stood at the front giving a lecture. And I think that's the same in kind of organizations as well. We're moving into a much more kind of reflective practice when we're looking at sort of softer skills like leadership and things like that. Getting people much more hands-on, giving them the opportunities to actually kind of practice skills and build those skills and things like that. So I'd be interested to hear from each of you kind of where you see the innovation in learning, either in the last couple of years or even kind of going forwards. Gavin, do you want to pick up first?
Yeah, so I think, we're still in this, post-pandemic, we're always going to be post-pandemic now, but definitely how learning is delivered, changed radically, and I family of teachers, my wife's a teacher, my mother, and that, that delivery, probably schools weren't fully ready for that from a technology standpoint. You had to roll out technology so students could access remote learning. It was stressful for teachers and pupils. So that's been a change we're seeing around learning about new audiences coming on. So in the corporate sphere, we've seen a lot of organizations realizing they need to reach their partners, their end users, their customers. Healthcare, we see people trying to reach patients in new ways. So where it used to be that our audience was the people inside our organization, now it's kind of become the extended enterprise, as we say, the ecosystem of different audiences. And some of our technologies weren't in place to deliver learning to the public. So working in the public sector, we see a lot of government agencies really trying to innovate and reach out to businesses, for example, to train them. And some of the technologies that were in place weren't able to do that. So actually a lot of innovation happened quite quickly in terms of producing the tools needed to deliver learning. But good learning hasn't really changed. We can debate different theories of the evolution of learning theory, but a good teacher can still be a good teacher, but they probably need to know how best to adjust for a new technological landscape. We'll still look at whether learners are actually achieving what they need to achieve, and monitoring that learning impact will tell us if which ideas are working and which ideas aren't. So I think it's a case of a lot of change in audiences, a lot of change in technical opportunities, but there's still a consistency running through there of what's going to make a good learning experience, and we probably shouldn't forget that.
Ciara or John, do you want to add anything?
Yes, I'm keeping an eye on the conversation that's happening here as well. So I think it's really important to remember that the tech is just there to support. It's just a tool. It's just a tool, the way like the book was a tool, or a teacher. Well, no, teacher's more than that. But it's not going to transform the education space or any space on its own, like learning space. So I think what you can see with like the how changes in learning are happening are being enabled by technology, right? So for example, in like what I would see most schools having adopted since the pandemic, right? Nearly all post-primary schools have just taken on either Google Classroom or Microsoft Teams, right? These are tools that we've been using in business for ages, but they just haven't been as prevalent in the education space. But what they've done is they've actually enabled different methodologies, right, in learning. So for example, like the flipped classroom model becomes a bit more interesting when you get the kids to listen to a podcast, say in advance of the lesson, or watch a video. And then they come into class ready to discuss. So it's an enabler in that instance of what you can do with the learning, because, back to Ilse's point, what she said, like all of technology, all of the learning technology is there to support the effectiveness of learning. And as soon as we lose sight of that, then it becomes irrelevant. And so I think what's important is how the teacher uses that technology to support that. Like one of the teachers I was speaking to recently gave us an example, and I was amazed that he had offered this to his students, but like real-time intervention in learning. So message me if, through our Teams chat or whatever, if you are doing your homework and you're struggling with something, you can't get the answer. So to contact me, or at least let me know what it is, so that when I come into class the next day, I can just target that. I don't have to go through and correct all 20 questions to see where you guys had a problem. I can jump straight in and just focus on that. So in that way, it's enabling, better teaching, better learning, I'd say. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's true. Now, I wonder if there's one of the areas that we look at quite a lot, and this may be because organisations are structured slightly different to education. I mean, obviously in education you tend to have a 1 to 30 ratio, whereas in an organisation you can have 1 to 1,000. So we look quite a lot at the kind of scalability and whether we can use some of these new technologies to make life easier for the people that are doing the teaching, or even the organisation as a whole, to know where to focus. I was just wondering whether you see much of that within kind of education settings, or whether it's much more focused on that kind of learner experience. Do you think it makes teachers' lives easier?
Definitely. I think that's kind of going to be the next big area. We're starting to see that more. So teachers are using it to kind of get that insight, like what I just described there. So in that instance, that teacher had just asked the students to give them that information. But if you are able to, for example, assign homework that is delivered, or sorry, that is automatically corrected, and then the teacher just gets the aggregate of the results, the technology can help them pinpoint, okay, where the students are struggling. And it does all that marking and just tells them if particular students are having a problem, for example. So I think from that administrative side of just marking work, or keeping track of records, hugely beneficial to teachers, and just speeding up time to actually, or speeding up, or taking care of some of that like admin stuff, so they actually have time to focus on teaching.
I think it's. And also what it gives them time to do is, as you say, give them the time to spend their time where it really matters. So, I mean, I've got kids at kind of secondary school, and you see that they do a lot of their maths online, they have a lot of science online. So they are almost doing that flipped classroom. They're doing the work, they're being taught it online, and then presumably the bits that they're not getting, or that lots of the kids in the classroom aren't getting, will then be covered in more detail by the teachers, which must be really useful for them. We've got a skills platform that you can kind of see kind of where everyone's skills lie, and then that would give you a really good idea of where you need to focus your efforts, wouldn't it? Certainly in a learning and development example. I'm aware that we're coming quite close to time now. I've got one final question. I have to be very quick on the answers, I think. It's quite a big question as well. How do you think AI is going to change the face of education and learning over the coming years? I'm going to pick on John.
Thank you.
Sorry, John.
That's okay. I started off by saying AI is democratizing the technology, and I'm going to stick with that point. This time I'm going to say that AI is going to make it easier to look at analytics and data, and particularly within our sphere, within L&D data. And it's really not very far off. So think about ChatGPT. We won't need humans in the future to write statements. We won't need object-orientated reporting systems. We'll be able to interact with our data in a conversational way. Literally, you'll be able to talk to your data. And what I'm saying now isn't a million miles away. Look at marketing companies, look at polling companies like YouGov, stock markets that are already investing in that chat analytic type of technology. And when we get it, well, we care about the people and their learning. We can make it more powerful. That's it for me.
Thanks, John. Gavin?
I like my analogy. So I use an analogy of cooking. AI is just another ingredient. Now it's a potentially powerful one, but really it's about organizations finding the recipes for success. So if you ask ChatGPT to give you, the top 10 things that are the next biggest thing, the ed tech sector has a long history of maybe not delivering on some of the next biggest things. I think the next biggest thing will be finding new recipes to combine these ingredients together. So combine AI with an advance in learning platforms, with a better understanding of people and organizational development, and you'll achieve something. So it's really about recipes for success. AI can definitely save time. It can definitely, as John says, take data, but we've then got to interpret what it gives us into a good learning experience.
I like that. Thanks, Gavin. And Ciara, unless David's going to cut us off, which he might do.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to, as much as we would love to continue the conversation. Lindsey, Ciara, Gavin and John, thank you so much for joining the panel discussion this afternoon. It's been a really engaging conversation, and I'd like to close out by thanking everyone for joining this Link and Learn event today. There's been some really great takeaways from Ilse in her presentation, and also a very engaging panel discussion. We appreciate you engaging in the chat, in the poll, and also the very popular networking. Our next Link and Learn May at the same time. Please keep an eye on email and our socials for more details very soon. Enjoy the rest of your day.